All right, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today for our April community or April e-learning event. We've been running a series called Community-Based Research Conversations, where we've been centering community and community-based research. So this is our fourth event of this series, and we're really excited to have Danica Evering and Subhanya Sivajyothi here with us today to talk about how they've empowered communities using research data by creating this Community Research Data Toolkit. We'll hear all about that from them today. As we get started, I would just like to welcome everyone again and respectfully acknowledge that the Community-Based Research Canada Secretariat is located on the unceded land promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River in the Haldimand Treaty of 1784. This land is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron or Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. This is important for us to recognize at Community-Based Research Canada because we acknowledge that there are many different ways of knowing, different forms of knowledge, and that's important for us to consider when we are doing research. So Community-Based Research Canada stands with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, and we're committed to embracing Indigenous knowledge systems and highlighting Indigenous-led research that aims to advance justice and reconciliation. For anyone here that may be new to Community-Based Research Canada, perhaps this is your first event that you've come to of ours. We are a membership-based organization whose mission is to advance community-based research excellence in Canada by strengthening partnerships, building capacity, mobilizing knowledge, and championing community-based research among individuals, communities, and institutions. We are a national network and we're a social enterprise. So we're funded entirely by our membership base with no core funding. And as part of the programs that we provide to our members, we host events like today's e-learning event, as well as our monthly community of practice events. And for anyone who is interested in exploring a little bit more, I'll put a link in the chat to our website where you can find all of the information about our upcoming events for members. Without further ado, I will pass things to our presenters today. Danica Evering is the Research Data Management Specialist in the McMaster University Library, and Subhanya Sivajyothi is the Data Analysis and Visualization Librarian. So I'll pass things over to the two of you. We're very excited to hear all about this community toolkit that you've created.
So, Bonnie, can you see the slides now?
Yeah,
we can, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, Linda. So yeah, I'll just jump right into it. Yeah, welcome to our presentation on the Community Research Data Toolkit. I'll just move on to the next slide. So here's a little bit of the outline of what we'll discuss. So we'll give a little bit of the context of developing the toolkit, and then the rest of the presentation is kind of divided into different sections, which is how the toolkit itself is divided into. And then, yeah, we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. So yeah, we're hoping, for this presentation that you'll be able to kind of think about research data management best practices, especially in the context of community-based research, be able to find tools and guidance on managing community research data, and then also consider if these tools are a good fit for your the research that you're doing in your own work. We'll also start, Danica and I both work at McMaster University, which is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations. Settlers have responsibilities under the Silver Covenant Chain Wampum. That's part of the 1764 Treaty of Niagara. The symbolism of this agreement is two figures connected by a silver chain that shows friendship and alliance, but also responsibilities for the relationship. So silver needs to be polished, lest to be tarnished. And this is a living treaty and a way for people to live together in peace. And even though it has been neglected and broken under conditions of colonization, we all remain subjects of this wampum agreement. In our press book, we kind of highlighted some of the amazing work that's being done in relation to Indigenous data sovereignty. And as settlers ourselves who worked on this toolkit, it wasn't intended for research buy-in with Indigenous communities, but we do want to support and build alongside that. So our resources are available as Creative Commons if the language and frameworks that we've developed are helpful to groups that want to take up and adapt for the more specific context of Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty. And yeah, you can read more about that in our toolkit. I'll just send the link here. If you're interested, we've kind of highlighted some really great organizations and resources. Next slide. So yeah, the Community Research Data Toolkit kind of came together after a 2-day workshop in spring 2024, which brought together community members, research data management specialists, and librarians, and many other roles and perspectives as well. We had initiated this because we had seen a lot of interest and growth in community partnerships for research, but not a lot of specific guidance related to the management of data created from those partnerships. So we also wanted to create at the same time guidance for smaller organizations like nonprofits who might conduct their own research but don't have the capacity to hire, full-time research data management specialists. And we wanted them to be able to use this toolkit for their own work as well. So to create this toolkit, we had initial one-on-one consultations with local community partners, the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton, and the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, whose notes then guided the workshops. And then after that event, we had working groups for each of the sections that I showed earlier to formalize those notes and ideas from those workshops and put together this toolkit. So this toolkit is a collection of more descriptive guidance documents, but then it also has templates and examples that you can take up for your own work and fill them out to whatever is helpful for, how you're managing your own data.
Okay, so this is me. And so thanks, Savanya, for setting us up so nicely. And just as a little bit of an intro, everyone, my work right now is as a research data management specialist in McMaster University Libraries. But before this work, I worked at a medical laboratory professional association. And before that, I worked at a socially engaged art organization. And so I have some experience working in nonprofits, both as a staff member and as a board member. And so my interest in this is I think we were collecting a lot of data, but there weren't a lot of tools or frameworks for doing that work. And so I think that's how I bring this to the table, is envisioning through this new lens and understanding that I have a research data management, what this might be able to look like in a community context. So it's been really great doing this work with Sabanya and with all of our colleagues who put this together. And so, when we think about what counts as research data, I think probably 10 years ago, if you'd asked me what research data was, I would have envisioned something like this lovely spreadsheet that we have on the right-hand side of the page. I love this data set, and I mention it every time because I think it's so cute, but it's Blanding's turtle data from biologgers, and it says whether the turtle is in the water or on the land and what angle it's on, like what the pitch of the turtle is. But what we mean when we say data can be anything that is information or materials that are used as evidence in research and scholarly work. And so this can also be things like focus groups and surveys. We did a lot of surveys at the organizations that I worked at the past. It could be research creation or community-based art projects, which is something I have a bit of experience with as well. We often will work with administrative data from our own records, but it could also be statistics or government-provided data. And then we might also have things like oral histories or interviews or things like that. And so one of the contributions of our colleague, Kathy Payton, was that research data as a term might not even be appropriate for some community contexts. And we might choose to replace this as a group with the word stories or evidence or some other form of language around it. But really what we're talking about is anything that might be kind of like used or analyzed or approached as a collection of information can be research data. And so I know we don't have a ton of time, but I'll just leave this open for a bit to get some thoughts from the room about what your research data looks like. And so, Saban, you mentioned some of our colleagues at the different community organizations that we've worked with. Um, the Social Planning and Research Council will often work with data from Statistics Canada or Canadian Mortgage and Housing information to determine like rent rates in Hamilton and how exorbitant they are. And um, the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board will work with administrative data about their students and then have to be really careful about how those are presented in a way that is representative, but also attuned to the different socio-political dynamics. And then the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center was kind of like gathering community submitted data on incidents of hate crime. So each of these groups is working in different ways, but they might have different forms of data. So we'll just take 1 second and pause to see if anyone would like to contribute what kinds of community research data you're working with. You can also unmute if that's easier. Stories of lived experiences. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, some of those narratives are really important, and we're going to talk a little bit later on the, I think in an ethics context, you might want to remove oral histories as soon as they're collected because they are inherently identifiable, but they are also really relevant to people. So maps from mapping workshops, yes, absolutely. Like seeing where different things are located and GIS, maybe related stuff. Digital safety, collages, very cool. And photos of community members. Yes, that's really great. Okay, thank you all for contributing. So let's keep some of these in mind as we move forward with thinking about the different data types. So just to kind of lay the table, some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of research data management are avoiding losing data, so having some systems and structures around it to make sure that it's kept safe. In Hamilton, we had a cyber attack in 2024, and we're still feeling the impacts as we transition to a city-run wastewater system. So we want to make sure that we are not losing data. We also, focus groups, interviews, photos, stories are really hard to collect. And so, or even impossible to recollect. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping those safe. We can anticipate some different things through data management. So being prepared for ethical considerations or where data will live in the long term. Just being organized is really helpful to know, especially for working across different groups where we are storing things. And then thinking ahead to community ownership. And that's where we're going to end today. But Sabanya in the intro mentioned the First Nations Information Governance Center's OCAP course, I think, and these other resources that are developing around First Nations ownership of data. And although it's quite different, I think First Nations data has clear structures around it in terms of legal agreements between governments. There may be other kind of community principles and desires for community ownership. And so the Black Health Equity Working Groups has developed an EGAP principle, so engagement, governance, access, and protection. So we're seeing some models for community ownership of data evolving, and this can help support that. And then just what this looks like. So we're roughly talking about a planning phase where we might be making a data management plan, and we've got some templates for thinking about that and just thinking about where data exists currently. We might want to bring in data from other sources, like we talked about the government data. We might have a middle phase of like doing the research or data collection and analysis where we're making sure that where relevant, we're de-identifying information or organizing it, making sure that it's stored securely. And then in the end, we might be in a publishing phase, so that might be around sharing results back with community members, but it could also be having community participants have an active role in publishing data or providing access to data that is restricted. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. All right. And I think Sabanya we can go to you now. Oh, wait, no, one last thing. Sorry, before I hand it over, but this was a really amazing contribution of our colleague Shahad El-Sakar in the Office of Community Engagement. But one of the things the toolkit does is scaling. And so a lot of the organizations that I've worked with have been this kind of like quite small organization. It may have like one to five staff, but we have a board and we have volunteers that are involved in our community. And so those board structures could have a role in data management as well. Like you might want to have a data management committee that's part of the board. Larger organizations like the YMCA or YWCA will maybe even have an IT team that they work with that is all in place there. And so those staff roles might have a role to play in data management. Um, and then there are also like some of the organizing I've done has been no organization. So it's just a group of interested people who are coming together in solidarity around tenant support. And in that case, um, it's really important, relevant work. We are collecting data. We might be interested in participating in research, but we might need to rely a little bit more on kind of third-party infrastructure. So I think this scaling is a little bit helpful, and each section of the toolkit has a little description of what these practices look like at those or could look like at these different levels. So, Sabanya, I'll hand it to you to talk about roles and responsibilities.
Thanks, Danica. So yeah, this toolkit section is called Roles and Responsibilities, and we designed it as a series of questions to ask across a timeline. And we kind of thought about it as before, during, and after research. However, it's kind of meant to be something that you look through in your partnership and go through together before embarking, or maybe even deciding whether you want to proceed with the partnership or not. So yeah, some things that influenced how we designed this template. So of course, these templates aren't going to remove certain power dynamics, but we wanted to be able to provide questions that community groups can ask to feel more empowered in their relationship and also clarify the mutual benefit. We were also influenced by feminist research ethics that focus on accountability, ethical care, and reciprocity between the research team and community partner, thinking about collaborative methods and transparency as well. And these principles were useful because we also started off this whole project collaborating with community groups that were working with either social justice or social equity related data. So it felt important to kind of carry on these values to inform the toolkits. So next slide. We were also influenced by scholarship around trust. So yeah, we did a little bit of a literature review on different studies of trust and relationship building and research partnerships, and noted that there's kind of a lack of attention to the concept of trust in community-based research partnerships. So we wanted to use that as a little bit of our foundation for the roles and responsibilities section. And some of the things that we found is that trust is often imagined as a binary outcome. You either have it or you don't, but that's how it's imagined. But through interviews and surveys, people's understanding of trust found that in practice, it's very socially embedded and it's a changing and continuous construct. And as mentioned, mistrust can stem from institutional histories of collaboration with particular groups or neighborhoods, and changes according to different levels of risk and vulnerability that they're feeling. So in terms of thinking about the toolkits, as I mentioned, we designed it as a before, during, and after, so mirroring how the data management plan itself is thought of. So some of the key features of it is sharing the decision making ability and creating an environment where all partners and participants have the opportunity to also become researchers and build their research skills as well, and understanding that knowledge is learned and then relearned and reflected upon. So for the before research section, yeah, there were some really great tools out there that we were inspired by. So we wanted to focus as much on the data side of things. And yeah, this is an example. So the Center for Art and Research's DMP template focused on specifically artists and art-related research data management. So we were kind of thinking of two situations: either a community group is approached or is thinking of approaching a research team to collaborate. And we wanted to think about the needs of each of those roles involved and communication goals, because of course, different institutions and groups have different expectations for those things. The during research section kind of focuses on having regular check-ins, addressing concerns, having a check-in about whether there's equitable participation or if it's meeting the set expectations in the beginning. And this section is really about the maintenance work and ensuring that the partnership remains respectful and productive and inclusive, and also an opportunity to clear any misunderstandings. And then in the after research section, these are questions about how you want to share the data and how the data will be stored. So these are all kind of meant to be high level framing questions to ask before you even decide to work together, because how you choose to share the data might actually help you make the decision of whether you want to embark on this process at all. So yeah, kind of reflecting on the whole thing. And for the whole process, co-learning processes showed to be the most kind of one of the more important elements that were found for building trust and having successful partnerships. So this looks like transactions between parties in terms of information, experiences, services, things like that. Once again, kind of clarifying that mutual benefit. Next slide. And yeah, we'll move on from this as well. So yeah, this is the next section, thinking about data management plan. So if kind of the previous section that I just talked about is more of a high level overview, this is getting into the very nitty gritty details. So you will notice there's a lot of continuity between these two sections. But yeah, this is very much focused on the data management side of things. Next slide. So yeah, a data management plan describes how you're going to create, store, organize, document, secure, preserve, and share your data. You might have filled out one of these before for your own research. And there's an example of a queer data management plan that we had developed. And this is kind of just the first section about it, thinking through the data collection part. So developing and updating a data management plan builds trust between parties in terms of keeping the information safe. And yeah, in general, just creating a plan so there aren't any unexpected surprises at the end where you learn, oh, you didn't know that the data was going to be stored this way, or you didn't know you're not the one that's going to have ownership of the data or whatever. So clarifying all of that before, or yeah, discussing what you want to actually do with the actual data. And this is helpful because then researchers can feel assured that the participants are fully understanding what's happening and actively consent to how the data will be shared. Next slide. So yeah, why use a DMP? So like I mentioned, starting the project on solid footing, describing each person's responsibility for the project data, standardizing certain data practices. So within your own organization, you might have a certain way of doing things, and from another group, they may have a different way of doing things. So making sure you're on the same page, figuring out the technical bits. You know, is it going to be stored on a USB drive in your drawer, or is it going to be, you know, accessible through some kind of cloud server? So figuring those things out. And it's also an opportunity to make sure you're kind of following best practices as well. Next slide, please. Oh, I think I might have. Okay, perfect. So why build a data management plan for a community project? So even though data management plans are technically maybe a grant requirement, it's also helpful to think of them as having that intentional conversation between researchers and community partners to get on the same page, instead of just thinking of them as kind of this checkbox that you're going through. Next slide. So yeah, what's in the toolkit itself? Like I mentioned, there's a little bit of descriptive text about the data management plan, but there's also a template that you can kind of download and use and repurpose for your own projects and how it fits. And oh, I think, is it your section, Danica? I forget if I'm going over.
Yeah, that's okay. That's funny. No, you're on a roll. So no, that was great. And so yeah, no, just thinking about, I just wanted to add to this conversation, and all the ground you laid is really great, Sonia. One of the things that came up early in this process, even in thinking about the art and research data management plan template, was Kathy Payton's contribution of like, this is kind of a web form in a lot of ways, and people are kind of facing this when they're applying for a Shared Connection grant phase 2, that they're just like filling out an online web form. And so this is envisioning for work with research participants that we could have a conversation around data instead. So this could happen at a meeting or a retreat or a town hall or a potluck or any of these kind of ways. It could be kind of like a smaller conversation between a research group that involves researchers from a university and community partners, like key community partners. So I think this is a really nice model and a nice way to think about data as a as a tool, but as a conversation framework instead of just a kind of like checkbox system and a way of building trust as well. Okay, and the last bit we're going to just talk about is data deposit. And so these, you'll see an echo in these two things. The tri-agencies are, as part of their, so tri-agencies are the, folks probably know, but the key funders in Canada. So the Canadian Institutes for Health Research and Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council are often the ones folks in this group are working with. But these will, they have a research data management policy. And so the two kind of requirements for researchers that they're starting to roll out are data management plans and data deposit. So this is the other thing that needed a little bit more articulation because it looks different in community research. And so um, I we've been thinking a lot about what community care and control of data looks like, and what it might mean to have a role in that. And so we might imagine a group of Hamilton queer elders that we're collecting some lived experiences from, we're speaking with them, and they might not want to share those publicly with everyone. It might not be safe to share those publicly with everyone based on homophobia and transphobia that's going on now and forever. So, but they might really want those stories to be available as well. And as a non-binary person, I would really love to have those stories from the elders that came before. So thinking about safer ways to do that is something that this community toolkit was thinking about. And so for those that haven't encountered this before, generally speaking, a data repository is a web platform that has a storage space for researchers to put data sets associated with research. So it can be a way of storing or archiving data, but also making it available and easier to find. And I just highlighted here a data set from our colleague Tina Fettner, who was looking at sex practices of Canadians. That's a very interesting data set. And she was able to ambiguate it enough to be able to share it safely as open research. But what it could look like in a community context is having a group of kind of like a research team spanning a community and university that then puts their data in a trusted data repository, but under restricted access. And then there might be ways to kind of like have other researchers research the data in a new ways. Everyone is so strapped for time. So if we can use the same data set again, and have some agreements around that, it might be really helpful. As the original community partners, you might be revisiting the data again, kind of like coming to the idea 5 years down the road, what's changed, what hasn't changed, and that is also relevant for funding decisions and things like that. And then they might be working with a new research group to kind of produce new data. So there's a range of ways that this could look like in terms of what data reuse can look like. But like I mentioned, there's a spectrum of security. And so we might see a range from data is not available for use at all through data might be shared using specific terms and criteria to data are available under an open license. And so kind of just to give the spectrum of the tools that are included in the toolkit for this, there is a data access committee framework that our colleagues have put together. And so this would be imagining a group of people, maybe it's a board committee, maybe it's kind of like an ad hoc group that would review requests that come in and grant access or deny access to those things based on a kind of criteria. So this would be a terms of reference template that we have created that you can kind of adapt and use locally. In the middle instance, we might have data that we feel comfortable with some people having under certain criteria. Like we agree if you are a researcher doing work to define the AIDS crisis, then we are going to say, yes, that is okay. So there are also some templates for terms of access for data and also data use agreements. So those frameworks are there as well. And then I think our colleague Alexis, Carlotta Cochrane, and us have been talking about visibility too, and the complexities of visibility, and also the importance of visibility, and kind of balancing all these things. And so some data might be available open access as well, because we would like it to be fully public. And so in those cases, it could be available online with an open data license. So that's a little bit of what we've got. I think we're at our 30 minutes. So Amanda, we might stop sharing and then we can just open for discussion.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see everything that you've put together, and from the tools and templates and everything that's in this toolkit. These are the kinds of things that we get asked for all the time. So I'm sure this will be extremely beneficial for folks thinking about, data management and data access from this community-based perspective, this data sovereignty lens. So thank you. We will open it up for questions and discussion now. So I'll encourage folks, if you have any questions you would like to ask the presenters, you can put them in the chat box, and I'll read those out to the presenters for discussion. Um, the session today is recorded, but if anyone is comfortable, being on camera in the recorded session, you're also welcome to turn on your microphone and your camera and chat with the presenters that way. But you can also just enter your questions in the chat box to stay anonymous in the video recording. So while we're waiting for those to come in, one question that I have, so, when you were working to develop this toolkit, as you were having conversations with community members, what what were maybe the one or two um, kind of pieces where there were the most dissenting opinions, or there was, the most effort to try to get to consensus? I'd be curious to know kind of what are more of those contentious places where there isn't a lot of consensus in speaking with community.
Savani, do you want to take a stab at that first?
Sure. I guess I'm not sure, because we mostly our conversations with various community organizations were more of framed as kind of what is missing currently for you and what would you like us to support you with. I guess
Right.
it's less about us finding consensus in that way, but I would be kind of curious about what kind of current debates are happening in terms of managing data, and
Mm-hmm.
similar to kind of what Danica was talking about in terms of visibility versus
Mm-hmm.
privacy and protecting that data. I'm sure that's a big debate amongst others, but I think one of the things that kind of came up a lot in our conversation was access to data, especially like institutional data or university data, like being able to also um, access that and use that for their own internal kind of research or research within their own communities, I think was something that came up a lot. But I'll pass it on to you, Tanika.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good answer. And one of the things I'll just add is that I, generally speaking, with community and qualitative research, there's a hesitancy to have data shared outside of the immediate project. And I think it makes sense for so many reasons. There is a vulnerability, data is really precious to us. And yeah, there are so many reasons not to, and I have felt those as well. But I'm also interested in what it might look like. And I can definitely see some cases where I heard one researcher say like the data is too precious to have only one set of eyes on it. And I think that is also true. And so, and I can see a real need as well, kind of having worked in some of these places that people are so busy, like they're from medical professionals to like folks experiencing poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is really strapped for resources. And so to be able to maybe speak with one researcher instead of speaking with every researcher that comes your way. And then you're like, okay, like the 10th group, I'm going to tell the same information again. I think there's some possibilities there. We just need to make sure that it's done safely. So,
Mm-hmm. That's a really great point. I mean, whether it's individuals within the community or community organizations researchers might partner with, we see so much burden and,
mhm.
kind of asks for capacity from these organizations or individuals that may not have a lot of time to give. So if there's ways that there can be more sharing of this data. There can be more secondary uses of data without having to go back to the communities. Thanks, Danica. We had a question come in the chat box, but I'll go to Shanaz first. I see your hand.
Thank you. Good morning. I am calling or participating from Calgary, Alberta. First of all, I just wanted to say congratulations to the team who has created this invaluable tool. My community-based research goes back to, I don't know, 2001, like a century ago, it feels like. And I wish that I had a tool in my toolbox. So we had to basically deal with all of these elements as we were building the research project with the community. So really appreciate what you have created. One challenge that we had experienced during our community-based research was related to knowledge translation, because as researchers, we are so passionate to share everything that we have created with the outside world, even through peer-reviewed journals and publications, presentations, and conferences like that. But what I noticed was that the community was sometimes very hesitant about what needs to be shared because of sensitivities. For example, my research was around chronic disease, diabetes in some high-risk communities, and they weren't very comfortable to share it very openly because of some considerations of, for example, insurance companies and coming after them, things like that. So I'm wondering, in your toolkit and in your communication with the communities during co-design, did you come across hesitancies like this or considerations like this at all?
Yeah. So, Bonnie, do you want to talk about David? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was going to talk about actually. Yeah, one of the community organizations that we had worked with, as I mentioned, was a district school board. So
Mm.
obviously very sensitive data because you're working with minors and it's education data and
Yeah.
a lot of personal information that's very sensitive. So yeah, I think one of our goals with the toolkit also was just making things available in plain language. So kind of showing people, oh yeah, like what is de-anonymizing or like
Mhm.
using pseudonyms or aggregating data. What does that look like? And then also one of the things that we talked about with the community groups, because they had similar concerns as well, is thinking about ways to visualize the data or showcase the data in different ways that doesn't single out particular individuals but shows like bigger patterns. So you're looking at a group of um, people rather than this person in this age has had this rate of attendance or whatever. And then yeah, one of the things that also came up was biases and harms that comes from creating data visualizations or presenting data in a certain way. Like obviously when you're showing like, oh, this particular neighborhood has this rate of whatever disease, there's a lot of like implications that people can make when you're not looking at the context. So we also talked about like creating those data visualizations or um, presenting these findings, but then also providing a lot of context for situating it in a way where people can't use that for harmful reasons, I guess. And that can look in a lot of different ways. So it's kind of hard to point out to a single particular way of doing things. And I guess that's also why kind of we try to build out kind of the conversational aspect of the toolkit as well. So, you can kind of present your findings in a way that makes sense to the community that you're working with. Yeah, I'll give it to you, Tanika.
Yeah, that's really good. I'll also just add, because I thank you so much for your question. It is definitely something I've been thinking about as well. And one of the things that we're seeing is controlled access data repositories, where the data would be kind of like stored but encrypted. And so then it's a conversation in each case whether or not you give access to that. So that can be a way, I think, like you said, there are people who are hesitant to have this be like fully public, and there are really good reasons for that.
Mhm.
And so then there might be ways to kind of have it be accessible and like people know that it's there, that there is data there, but that it wouldn't be available to everyone.
Mhm.
And I think in some of those cases, you might be able to trust. There's also like segmenting the data set too, right? Like with the people who are okay with it and those that aren't. Yeah.
And I think it is about the data ownership because with
Yeah.
indigenous research and communities, we always had to comply with OCAP. I mean, that's a kind of different category, but with other communities that I worked with, we had to make sure that they know data belongs also to them, not just to us as researchers
Yes.
organization. So they had to absolutely review the language that we had used in publications and approve it and give us kind of permission, even to publish them. So I think that relationship with the communities is probably the key.
Yeah. 100%.
Like a lot of things in community-based research, there's no one-size-fits-all approach in a sense. And so that's why, I mean, it's fantastic to have these tools and templates that you've developed, but we need to ensure people are, adapting them to the communities that they're with. So it's fantastic to hear you speaking about it in that way and using that language.
Amanda, that's a really good point too. These are meant to be cut up and used. So they're Creative Commons with attribution, but like Creative Commons meaning you can do what you would like to with them. And I think um, because people are so busy, I find this as well. Even if you totally change a thing, at least you're not staring down a blank page. And so this is at least something to start with. And even if you disagree with it and with like other systems within it, then it's something to start with. So
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
I'll go to the question that came in the chat now.
Mhm.
Karina has asked if there are any trusted and secure web platforms that you would recommend in terms of those data repositories. And then in addition, what are qualities to look for? And do you have any tips on figuring out those qualities of a new platform? For example, trying to figure out if the data is stored on a Canadian server.
This is very complex. And it really varies from what resources we have available as well. So, universities a lot of universities in Canada are part of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, which provides secure infrastructure for things. There is a pilot project going on right now for secure social sciences data and secure data sharing, like a secure data repository with controlled access. Those aren't available yet, but it is something that's coming. And so if you're affiliated with an institution, I think, Amanda, I would be interested to get you involved in those conversations as well, because I think there are really important things to consider with that. But
Mhm.
these are like, uh, sorry to keep shouting out Alexis, our colleague, but we've been thinking a lot about this in terms of like the different platforms that we have. And so um, you're kind of sometimes deciding between bad options as well. And so there was a project that we worked on lately that we were looking at Google because McMaster is a Microsoft institution. So we were like, okay, Google is maybe like um, not accessible by the institution, so it's not visible to the institution. But then Google is also has servers in America, and so like
Mhm.
these things are really hard, and corporations are in a lot of control on this. And so um, I don't know if there are any truly great answers right now, and it's just about looking at exactly like you say, the server location. Can a government access the servers if they want to, which is something that we're seeing Microsoft can possibly would give data to the US government if they ask. So that's another consideration.
Mhm.
Um, there are other things though. I'll shout out that our student Oishi Ghosh and our colleague Lawrence Horton put together a data security chapter for the toolkit as well. And so that
Mhm.
has some really good things that has some of the qualities and principles that you might look for in terms of encryption and kind of like access controls and things like that that you can implement.
Mhm. Oh, that's fantastic. And something you'd said there, Danica, so you were talking about this possibility of moving towards like a social science and humanities database that would be accessed through post-secondary institutions. And in
Yeah.
community-based research, we often think about, the equity and the knowledge democracy there, right? We shouldn't necessarily have post-secondary institutions gatekeeping that access when community should have access to their own data and to use it. So it makes sense as a pilot to perhaps start that way. But what, can you imagine a world where something like that could be open to the public? Even if that's, a way going through the universities that anyone can access. What do you envision that could look like? Um,
Yeah, actually, so the tool that software is being built on, and I cannot speak to this is something that I'm aware of, but I'm not a
mhm,
representative for. But from my understanding, it would be on McMaster or like the dataverses that the different schools
mhm,
administer. But those you can create an account. Anyone can create an
mhm.
account on
Okay.
those platforms as well. So you do need to be kind of like a known person, like, and have a conversation, I would imagine, before giving access to the data. But
Mm,
there are, I think there's absolutely I agree with you, Amanda. I don't think we want this to only be available through a university system. And actually, we'll shout out our colleague, Lynn, who's been working on um, what is it called? It's funny, the Community Scholars
Scholars
Program.
program, yeah.
And so they provide access to journal articles for
mhm.
community groups. And so I think there's some good movements towards that. And I'd like us to keep going there because I think it's really important. And there may be a system. So we shouted out CREO, the Community Research Ethics Office, in our system too. So this is a way of kind of like having, we might envision a community group that would like to do some research, but
Mhm.
isn't affiliated with a university. There are still some systems that would support that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
thank you, Shahad, for sharing that link.
She beat me to it. I was just about to look for
Yay.
that myself because that Community Scholars Program is such an interesting and incredible program to have. So a little bit of a side note there for anyone who's not affiliated with academic institutions that would like access to those paywalled journal articles. This program is phenomenal in supporting that. Mhm. Maybe I'll ask if there's any more questions, folks can continue to put them in the chat, but I have maybe a final question to help us wrap up. Um, this series, the topic has all been about centering community in community-based research. And we've been thinking about how we can ensure that that community voice is at the center, is the driving voice in research projects. So as we're talking about some of these, data repositories, we've spoken about the benefits it would have for community in terms of reducing that overburden of research asks that they sometimes get. But how do you think these kinds of data suppositories or repositories, sorry, could support really centering and elevating and amplifying community voices in research?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then Sonia, if you want to add anything. So Amanda, it's a really good question. And I think a room there's room for joint ownership of data where a researcher and a community decide together. There's
Mhm.
also room for communities to be making those decisions entirely themselves. And so I am hopeful that we have access mechanisms that put community in the driver's seat in a lot of these cases.
Mhm.
We're seeing some cool projects. Actually, I'll mention there's a really cool project by Dr. Kara Ross that Shahad Al-Sakar and our colleagues at the Office of Community Engagement have connected us with.
Mhm.
And what she's doing, there's an article that I'll find after I'm finished talking, or maybe Shahad has it, but she's using RedCap, which is a survey software that was
Mhm.
kind of like developed in university spaces, but she is making sure that communities can use it kind of like a CRM, a resource management system as a way of collecting their own data. And
Okay.
then they kind of hold the administrative controls over that
Mhm.
data and then grant researchers access when they would like that to happen. So I think there's some really cool ways of using these technologies to put community at the center and center their experiences of data as well. Yeah, Savanya,
Mhm.
anything to add there?
No, yeah, you did a great job. And yeah, I think one of the sections or one of the aspects of the data deposit section, at least for the toolkit, is talking about things like data access committees. So having community members represented, making sure that, yeah, there's community members represented on those committees or they make up the data access committee and being able to make those decisions about who's accessing the data and things like that is also another piece of that as well. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, that's great. And thank you, Danica. I see you shared a link in the chat there.
Yeah, that's a news article about the Calgary project. Actually, you might know each other, Shanaz. I'm not sure. Yes. Um,
Oh, fantastic. And we'll make sure to put all of these links beside the recording when we post the recording. So folks who are rewatching this after will have access to those as well. Mhm. And we did have one final question come in, so maybe we'll use this as the last question. So from a knowledge mobilization lens, data collection and analysis can be quite opaque to the public. Are there any common challenges you face when informing populations you want to collect data from, or misconceptions that you frequently encounter? And what are a couple key points that would be useful for the public to know?
I can attempt part of that question. Yeah, I think I'm like, even people that are working within the research data management field, I feel like there's things that are changing all the
Yeah.
time and,
Mm,
acronyms and terms that I'm not always aware of. So I can only imagine if this is like not your wheelhouse at all, like just even understanding some, yeah, processes around like how data is protected or how consent works and all these other things. I think that's something that you can always kind of clarify. And that's why we have so many kind of templates related to having a conversation first to be like, are we actually on the same page in terms of what um, the data storage looks like or access looks like? And yeah, when we were kind of doing an early kind of literature review for this toolkit, one of the things that we found is often when community members like feel that they're a part of the actual research project, they're more likely to actually use those findings for their, like if it's like a finding that
yeah.
helps people
yeah.
organize or whatever, then they're more likely to embed those findings into their own practice. So I think, yeah,
Mhm.
having them included in the research project or also just actually highlighting what they're actually getting out of this project, like what is the point of this project and how is this actually helping them, and being really clear about that um, is definitely one point. I'm not sure if you don't want to add, Nika, about other misconceptions that you've encountered.
Yeah, one of the misconceptions that I've encountered, which I held as somebody working in a nonprofit as well, was that like we weren't doing research always. Because I think I would have defined research as when we were working with a university researcher and not otherwise. And so I think thinking broadly about what research can be, I think every time we surveyed our membership, that was also research in its own way, and we would be analyzing those results. And so I think like thinking a little bit more broadly about what kinds of activities communities are already doing that overlap with the research project is really interesting, and that we can see this as research data. It's not just kind of like necessarily data to inform advocacy. That is a kind of research in its own way.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a really good point. And I think, yeah, from my English major background, one thing I always found helpful is also just using metaphors. Even for
yes,
me, it's useful. Like when you were talking about reusing data, I had a former colleague that referred to it as like single-use plastics versus
yes.
recycling. And thinking about data as when you put all this time and effort and you're kind of putting this burden on a community to get these research findings, you'll want to be able to use that again. So I feel like that's a better way of kind of framing it rather than your personal information is being shared everywhere or whatever. So, and
Mhm.
obviously it's not, not to mislead or whatever, but being clear about how you're doing the analysis in a way that protects people. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and why too, Sonia? That's such a good point. I'm just putting one of my favorites in the chat, which is the information maintenance as a practice of care. And this is, I, they talk a lot about maintenance and this kind of like exactly the single-use plastics idea of kind of like we we don't want these things to just be disposable, but they are actually precious, that we've spent a lot of time gathering them and creating them, and they deserve to be maintained and cared for. And so, um, yeah, I think that's a really lovely metaphor, Sabanya.
Mhm. Well, and I loved that you brought that back too as well, the idea when you were speaking, Stefania, that by engaging community in the process of planning the research, community, we're not just collecting data from community, we're collecting data with community. And that's what community-based research is all about, is having community involved in those decision-making processes around the research. And if we do it in that way, there are no, misconceptions about what's happening to the data collection and analysis because the public, the community is part of making those decisions of what will happen. So when we reframe things in that spirit of community-based research, I think some of those issues that you might come across in research approaches that aren't participatory kind of get resolved just by the process of community-based research. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad that both of you were able to come and speak about this today. I'm sure there's lots of valuable information in the toolkit for folks that want to go through that full toolkit. It will be shared on our website with the recording, so folks will have access to that to dig in deeper to all the incredible stuff. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here and watching and listening today. If you have any interest in going back and rewatching this or watching previous recordings of past e-learning events, you can find all of those on our website under the Resources tab and Webinars and Discussions. So you can find those there to rewatch, share this video with others who you think might benefit from this conversation. Stay in touch with us. If there's any folks here who aren't already signed up for our e-news on our website, you can sign up to our e-news where you'll get information about the upcoming events that CBR Canada is hosting, but also new toolkits and resources and case studies. This toolkit that Janika and Subhanya talked about today was shared in a past e-learning series. So great e-newsletter if you'd like to sign up and get that right to your inbox. And we would love for all of you to join us in May for our next event in this series, Centering Community and Community-Based Research. Next month, we will have Dr. Arij Al-Hamad, Mr. Jalal Nazari, and Dr. Katerina Matursky coming to speak to us about centering community and homestay housing, a research project that supported displaced Ukrainian women in Toronto. So it'll be a fantastic and very interesting presentation, I'm sure. Um, and for those kind of looking to continue conversations like the one we had today, I'll point out as well that our community of practice, so for folks who aren't familiar with our community of practice, it's a discussion space where we have a central topic we talk about every month, and we discuss and share insights and learnings in small breakout rooms. The topic in May, it hasn't been posted on our website yet, but it's a group who has done grassroots data collection at a community level. So they're struggling and tackling a lot of these issues we've been talking about community ownership over data. They are a case example of that happening in practice. And we'll be talking about some of the challenges and successes of that in that community of practice. So you can find information on that on our website if anyone would like to continue grappling with the kinds of things we've talked about here today. So I'll share some links in the chat for anyone who would like to directly find the registration page for our next event, as well as where you can sign up for our e-newsletter. And thank you again so much, everyone, for being here. It's starting to feel like spring, at least here in Ontario, hopefully across Canada as well. Wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you again for joining us. And thank you so much, Danica and Subhanya, and everyone that's been a part of your team in producing this toolkit. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.